And I just want to welcome everyone. I think this is our seventh winter learning series, and we're here with Ben Gotschall from Wolfe's Neck Farm up in Maine, and we're going to talk about grain-free dairy. I'm sorry. It's one of those days. I keep looking outside. I want to be outside. Okay, I'll let Ben take it over from here.
Okay, thank you, Michelle. I'm gonna share my screen. See if it works here first. Is that working there, Michelle?
Yeah, you're doing good.
Okay, great. So my presentation today is grain-free dairy. Going to talk about challenges, opportunities, mistakes, lessons, and then success stories. So I debated about what to focus on with this presentation. Other times I've given versions of this same presentation. I focused a lot on methodology and on-farm practices and little tricks and tips that I do on my farm. But instead, more of a focus in this presentation is going to be more of like the philosophy behind grain-free dairy or transitioning to grain-free dairy, probably because that's kind of where I'm at the moment with my transition here, moving to Maine from Nebraska. So I'm now at Wolfe's Neck Center for Agriculture and the Environment in Freeport, Maine. Up until November, I was in Nebraska, where I was born and raised and have lived most of my life. And so I've been involved in the dairy industry for about 30 years, a little over 30 years, and have always raised cattle on pasture, but have been 100% grain free for about the last 20 years. So glad to be here, and I thank Michelle and all the folks at Granite State for the opportunity to share. And I will leave hopefully plenty of time for questions later on, and we can talk maybe about more of the specific practices and methods and things with that. But so yeah, like I said, let's talk about how we think about things. So much of what we do or don't do in farming and in life, I think, is really influenced by how we think and what we think about our goals and our purpose, so to speak. And so I thought I'd share a quote that helps me, that kind of sums up kind of this is something that I felt like I needed to hear about 20 years ago, when we were making the transition to grain-free dairy. And really at that time, there wasn't anywhere near the amount of support and peer information from peers who were doing some of the similar things. And so it was really difficult. I'm not going to say we were the first ones, but we were definitely felt quite isolated out in the middle of Nebraska, in the middle of cattle ranch country, doing dairy anyway, let alone to be doing it without the use of grain. So I thought I'd include this quote: "Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything." And so hopefully the folks that are here watching this are on some part of that spectrum of changing, whether it's to grazing or to grass or grain-free dairy. So I'd imagine that there's some people that are doing one or the other, and we're all kind of on that progression. So let's get into a discussion of that. So basically, what I would like folks to start thinking about, and what I'm thinking about kind of on a daily basis, is what is my mindset? So it seems to me like there's kind of two dominant mindsets in the grazing world, or in the grain-free world, so to speak. And the first one is that grazing is a tool within your management system, and that you're a dairy manager or you're a dairy owner and you're managing your dairy, and you have all these different tools that you use to feed your cattle, to manage your herd, to take care of your land and things like that. And grazing is just a tool within that system. And then I also see folks for whom grazing is the management system. Like it's all about the grazing, and the management system in that case kind of dictates a lot of the other things that happen on the operation. And it seems to me like, and I know I'm going to be making a series of generalizations here. And so if you feel left out, or if you feel like a statement that I make doesn't directly apply to you, that's okay. But I'm just trying to get some observations that I've seen in my relatively short time doing this. But what I've seen that is, if the former is true, if grazing is a tool, if you view grazing as a tool, then going 100% grain free will likely happen for some very specific reasons, and it'll probably take you a little bit longer. If the latter is true, if you already view grazing as kind of the system that you're operating within, and it's not necessarily a tool, but maybe the medium, then going 100% grain free is probably something that you might be ready to adopt more quickly, and probably for different reasons. And so we talk about challenges. The first challenge is the transition, and I always like to start with why. Whether I'm making decisions or training someone new, which is part of what I do here through the dairy grazing apprenticeship with our apprentices here at Wolfe's Neck. But with every challenge is an opportunity, and so when you're thinking about why you might be thinking about making the transition to grazing or to grain-free dairy, market premiums come up a lot. Depending on what your market is and where, whether it's to a co-op or to a company that's buying your milk, or even direct marketing or a personal private label. Market premiums, there are some market premiums have been in the past associated with 100% grass-fed or grain-free milk and products made from it. It might be to reduce your purchased feed inputs. Utilizing pasture as a feed resource can, if managed well, significantly reduce purchased feed, can reduce your costs in that area. Maybe you have some marginal land that isn't good for other types of production. And so grazing seems like the best way to utilize that land. You might be adding value to a cover crop rotation. A lot of folks are doing cover crops now and implementing that into their whole farm management. And one way to make cover crops make sense is to add value to them through livestock grazing. Maybe it's a lifestyle choice for you. Maybe the grazing lifestyle and the way of life of a pasture-based farm or operation is appealing to you, and you're wanting to make that change for that reason. Consumer perceptions kind of tied to market premiums, but especially if you're direct marketing or kind of marketing your own brand, grass-fed milk has a very positive consumer perception. That seems to be one of the benefits to making that transition. And then it might be necessity. You might just have to, it might just be time that you have to do something new. And that last one is pretty much the reason why we made the switch, why my family made the switch back when we did, was because we just were kind of out of options. The conventional milk market was not too good. We weren't really profitable. We weren't able to fully control our cost of production due to all of the purchased inputs that we were bringing into the farm and the grain that we were feeding our cattle. And we just basically kind of had to go bare bones and use the resources that were at our disposal, which at that, where we were located in Nebraska was grassland, was pasture land. We were on a beef ranch, and we just also happened to be milking cows. And so that was kind of that last one was kind of what drove our decision to make the transition. Although I would highly recommend that you don't necessarily make that decision because you have to. I hope you're not at that point, but that is something that does happen. Um, and so, how to transition? Obviously, you could do it over time, gradually, incrementally. Cut back a few pounds here, cut back a few pounds there. Maybe start with your young stock, and as your fresh heifers come in, you feed them less grain or no grain at all. Or you might just decide to do it all at once. Um, the drastic method or the rip off the band-aid method is definitely something that I've seen done. That's definitely what we did. Um, that looking back now, I don't know if we would have done it quite that way. But again, as I said, we were doing it more out of necessity than as a planned transition over time. So we were more likely, or we were more suited to doing it all at once. But the question is basically, how long do you want to be on the fence? How long do you want to be kind of straddling both markets or straddling both management systems, or some folks might call it the highest cost, where you're incurring the costs of transition while at the same time incurring the costs of your old, the old way of managing things. So a lot of it's going to come down to you personally and how you learn from mistakes. Um, how often you repeat mistakes, how fast you stop repeating them, and how much it costs you to make those mistakes, because you will make mistakes, and you should just acknowledge that right at the beginning. And so, again, going back to knowing why you're doing it and identifying that, that will in some ways determine how you do it. And acknowledging that you're going to make mistakes. And then when it comes to success in the transition, again, it'll be determined by how you learn from those mistakes. And just know that there's no one way. There's,
What?
I can give my story about how I did it. That doesn't necessarily mean that's how you should do it. A lot of times we can get, because we are so intimately connected with our own experience, we can often push our ideas on other folks and in an attempt to make them feel like that's the only way to do things. But there really is no one way. But there are some things that there are no substitute for, and one of those is observation. Basically, no one should know your land, your cattle, or your processes better than you or your team or your staff. So time spent, observation is a skill, and it has to be practiced in order to improve it. And so time spent observing your herd's behavior, or your pasture behavior, the performance of your forage, that's never time that's wasted. And especially if you enjoy it. For me, especially, that's probably one of the best parts of the job, is the time spent just watching the cattle out on pasture and seeing what what species they go to harvest first, or how they behave at certain times of the day or during certain weather events. I that's probably the most enjoyable part of working with animals, that I think, is just watching them. And so I tell myself that time's not wasted, but I really don't think that it is, because that observation is very important and will suit you in a lot of other things, in a lot of other endeavors. But keep track of stuff. Even though you might be paying close attention, you still need to keep track of things. Keep track of as many details as you can, to help you to make decisions in the future. If you rely on your memory or your gut, even if you're really good at what you do, even if you've been, working the same ground for many years, you'll still never be better than the person who has all the data at their disposal, and can just look it up and can see exactly how much rain, what our average rainfall is in June, for example. So Again, nobody can remember everything, especially everything that might be important later. So recording details and keeping track of things might not seem important now, but there might be a time that it will seem important. Um, Especially, for example, if you're also planning to get like organic certification. So folks that haven't gone through the organic certification process, um, you will find by going through that process that there's a lot of things that you might have wished you kept a record of. And so if you just kind of get used to keeping records of things, you'll be in a lot better position to do that, to go through that process. There's no substitute for objective self-awareness. No one's opinion matters as much as yours. And again, this kind of goes back to the why of things. You know, your goals and your priorities and your quality of life and all the things that are important to you and your operation and your family and your staff. Those things are important, but you need to be able to look at yourself objectively, and know where you're at and view yourself. You're the manager of a complex system. And as part of that system, you'll work better with others, and their contributions will be more valuable to you, if you're able to think about yourself and your role objectively. And that's also a skill that can be developed over time. And I know I have a lot of work to go in that area. But really, all of this is to be able to make informed decisions. So, decisions that are based on one factor are usually not as effective as informed decisions that take into account many different things. And so, making decisions at the last minute out of necessity or out of urgency or emergency usually leads to poor outcomes. Utilizing information and taking the time to explore alternatives and seeking wise counsel will almost always pay off. And so that, again, is not time wasted. I know I just said not to listen to other people, or that no one's opinion matter as much as yours, but there will be people that will be able to help you, and seeking out their advice will benefit you, especially when it comes time to making your own decision, because they can't make your decisions for you. So let's talk about some mistakes. Mistakes are usually seen through the problems that they cause. And so I like to first ask, what is the nature of the problem? And I've got nature in caps there, because one of the most common answers to what causes problems in agriculture is Mother Nature. It's the weather, it's the time of year, it's all these things that we can't control. But often it's actually when we fail to work with nature or observe nature, that causes a lot of our problems, especially when we're relying solely on the resources that we grow ourselves on our farm, in our soils. And another question that you might want to ask yourself when you start seeing problems is, when you think about fixing problems, are you applying technological solutions to biological problems? Grazing is, again, it's managing a type of complexity of natural cycles and processes. And because of that, technological solutions are sometimes limited in their effectiveness. It doesn't mean that technology doesn't work or that it has no value, but if it only addresses symptoms, so to speak, instead of root causes, technology might not always be the most effective tool. Because there's really, when you're talking about tools, there's really no poor tools, but just poorly used ones. And so here's a couple of generalizations about technological and biological solutions. Technological solutions are generally faster to implement. You can just go buy that machine or purchase that software or download that app. Sometimes they can be more expensive. Um, Technology, especially the latest, greatest technology, sometimes can cost quite a bit to get a hold of. Um, Biological solutions generally are slower to realize. Take those things take time to develop incrementally, but oftentimes because of that, they're more resilient. So working on soil quality and building soil health and soil structure isn't something that you can do with one pass of a tractor with a spray rig. Um, but over time, 10 years down the road, um, you might find that the system that you've built on top of that biological process and biological solution might be more resilient. Um, and so, one of my favorite quotes about tools is, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So, if you're always implementing, if you're always quick to grab the next tool, um, or tillage tool, so to speak, or something, you might be missing a lot of other things that you could be doing to help yourself. Um, that's another thing to think about. Another common mistake that I've made, that you see happen is overgrazing. Um, Again, I think we're getting some background noise there. I don't know if somebody's got a mute, needs a mute button, but so overgrazing, that's a common thing that we see on most grazing operations, starting out and adjusting to changes. But and we're often told that you just got too many cows out there. You got too many livestock out there. That's kind of the common observation is, oh, you've got too many animals on the land. And while that sometimes might be the case, um, more often I think it's usually something else. Um, Usually it was a failure uh, to have a plan in place, or the plan itself didn't really allow for flexibility and adaptability to changes or challenges. So there's a lot of grazing planning tools out there. You've got your grazing charts, your grazing wedges. You've got pasture map. There's all kinds of different ways to plan your grazing. And so a lot of times overgrazing is just not using those tools, or those management decision making tools to plan your grazing system or your grazing season. Um, More often, I think overgrazing is caused by under resting and not responding to the needs of the soil or the plants. Not giving enough rest period, and having those plants in prime shape before they're harvested again, um, can look like overgrazing. It can look like, oh, you've just got too many animals out there and you're taking too much, but really there just wasn't enough to take there to begin with. And so, again, overgrazing is usually a symptom or the thing you see, and the other things are more likely what you did or didn't do that caused the problem. Um, Another challenge or mistake, that I've definitely made is in energy management. When you first talk about going to grain-free production, where are you going to get the energy? Where are you going to get the starch? How are you going to substitute corn? How are you going to, what how are you going to make up for the lost production? And it's a big consideration. And so there's definitely some different points of that I have seen, that I've kind of gone through, and it's kind of been a progression. And so I'll kind of walk you through that. So the first thing, one of the things that you can do is you can find non-grain sources of energy. So there, depending on, perhaps you're certified through a grass-fed certification, and you're looking at their list of approved supplements, and there might be something on there that you could use, using catalytic inputs, um, whether those are minerals or other supplements that basically help your cattle digest forage more effectively. You can reduce energy demand. The most efficient energy is that which you do not use. Or you can develop adapted animals. And so in terms of finding non-grain sources, the two big ones that you hear a lot about are molasses and sugar. And so, folks top dressing with molasses or feeding cattle molasses, putting it on hay. That's definitely a source of energy. Sugar, something that we've experimented with mixing with minerals or other supplements to get, to get some of that energy into the diet. We've also used some catalytic inputs. Apple cider vinegar is one that you've seen. A lot of folks are using that as a kind of a supplement that helps the cow to digest, to get the most out of the forage that they're eating. DUA is a product that we've had experience with that also kind of does similar things. And then salt brines are another thing that folks have used, that we've experimented a little bit with as well, to basically to help cattle utilize the feed that's available in order to optimize the production, to maximize the production, or maintain body condition during the dry period or something like that. Energy management, as far as reducing energy demand, there's a couple ways that we've found that work with this. Once a day milking is one of them. When you go to once a day milking, some folks don't see much of a production drop. Some people do, but usually what you do see is cow body condition scores can sometimes improve with that. So you're basically just not asking as much of your cattle in that situation, so their energy needs are not as high as they might be if you were milking them twice or three times a day. Kind of tied with that is seasonal calving. If you're asking cattle to produce and to peak in their lactation at a time of year where you don't have the quality of forage that you need to get her through that peak and to give her the nutrition that she needs during that peak, timing your calving seasons or season to coincide with that is something that can also be done. And then you can also just develop animals that are adapted to the forage that you have on your farm, to the resources that are available. And that's done through selection, pressure, and culling. I mean, selection pressure is nothing more than not helping them. And then culling is removing the cattle that just don't perform in the environment that they've been presented with. And that leads to another way to develop these animals in your herd, which is through genetics. And so one of the lessons that I've learned is that genetics don't matter until they do. So I've had a lot of people tell me that genetics don't matter, that, a cow's a cow, jerseys are jerseys, Holsteins are Holsteins, they do what they do. And to an extent, that's true, because genetics are definitely not a substitute for management. They're not genetics are not a substitute for good management, especially. But even the best management can't really make up for poor performing animals or poor performing genetics. And so, genetics, I like to look at it that genetics give you the potential. They give you the ability to possibly do something, and management is kind of the key to unlocking that potential. And so, most cow problems are really just people problems. We've already been talking about mindset and management. And again, to unlock that potential, you kind of got to work on yourself first. And then that will help you fix your cow problems if that's what you're having. Because you can poorly manage great cows that have superior genetics, but you probably won't be reaching your operations potential in situation. And you can be a good manager and effectively manage cattle that have poor genetics. You can, but the question is, will it be good enough? And so what I ask is, why wouldn't you rather be a good manager and effectively manage cattle that do have superior genetics? Because to me, this is when in my experience, this is when I started to see that my herd could improve in ways that I didn't think were possible. And I was able to meet some goals that I didn't think that I would be able to achieve. And so I would much rather be working with cattle with superior genetics, or at least appropriate genetics to what my goals are. And then it's just up to me to manage those cattle to their potential. And so again, we're going to go back to a mindset question. How do you think about yourself in relation to your cows and your cow herd? Do you work for your cows, or do your cows work for you? How many times have you heard somebody say, "Oh yeah, old number 91, she's my best cow. I just wish she would breed back." Or, what if instead you could say, "Well, that right there is my best cow, and she's still giving as much milk as her granddaughters. And there's one there, and there's one there, and there's her daughter, and there's another one of her daughters." So, how we think about ourselves in relation to our cows, and how we think about our cows can oftentimes influence, especially the genetics we use and the way we manage them. So if you work for your cows, most likely breeding costs are an expense. It's just the money you have to spend to get cows in calf so that you can get milk out of them. But if your cows are working for you, oftentimes you can see that breeding costs are an investment that actually do bring back a return on that money spent. If you're working for your cows, you might pamper your problem cows along, and pretty soon, if you do that over time, without removing those cows from your herd, pretty soon you're going to have a lot of cows, or really no cows that don't have any, or that pretty soon there aren't any without problems. Every cow's got something that you gotta treat, or that you gotta deal with, and so you look forward to getting out the IV needle and treating for milk fever every single year, every single calving. But if your cows are working for you, you just get rid of those cows, and over time you don't have as many or any with those problems that suck away at your time, and chip away at your vet budget and things like that. If you're working for your cows, your best cows leave the herd before they can replace themselves. They don't breed back, or they have some other problem, and they just don't stay. And when your cows work for you, even your worst cows replace themselves, and before they're gone. If you work for your cows, veterinary expenses are necessary. Like, you have to have that vet out. You have to incur those costs in order to have a healthy herd of cows. Or you could have a healthy herd and make those visits unnecessary, or make those visits and the money spent on your vet budget something that again brings you back a return and enhances and supplements your quality of life, or your cow's quality of life, rather than being something that you have to have as a crutch in order to be able to walk. So as far as lessons learned, I struggled with how many of these I wanted to include, but I think I'll just go through some of the bigger ones. What I learned early on is grain-free dairy production is most similar to grass finishing beef. The kind of forage and nutrition that you need to finish, to put a real finish, a high quality finish on beef cattle, is about the same way that you need to feed a dairy cattle for optimal production. And so what I found was that for me, managing my dairy more like a ranch has been has been more helpful than really any other mindset change that I've ever made. I had the benefit of coming from a ranching background, where we were basically running a ranch that we also milk cows on. But making the decision to run the dairy side of the cattle more closely to the beef side of the cattle, that has been more helpful than probably anything that I've ever decided I needed to do. And again, this might be different for people in different locations and different operations in different situations, but for me, that was one of the lessons that I've learned. And a question that you might ask yourself, and what I ended up asking myself was so looking at a successful beef operation, how would those principles followed by those operations apply to a dairy? And so, I probably read more articles and more books and more and just seek out more information about beef production than I do about dairy production. And honestly, a lot of those articles have helped me much more. Um, I'm not here to bash any dairy educators or Hordes Dairymen or any of the publications out there, but in terms of the most effective management changes, or methods or principles, I got those from ideas that came from the beef industry and people managing beef cattle. And in terms of success stories, I think we've seen a few of these over the years. I've got 4 listed on the screen. There's been probably more. These are some of the ones that I've had experience with, but that I've also seen other people have experience with, because I don't want to just talk about what I've done or what I've seen, but also what other folks have from what I've seen had some success with. And they might be things that we see a demand for in the industry. But to me, much of the success of grass-fed dairy or grain-fed dairy, much of its success, the industry's success, I think lies in the opportunity and the potential growth of the industry. I think there's still a lot more room for grain-free dairy or grass-fed dairy to grow, a lot more places for it to go. And so in terms of direct marketing, people really want grass-fed milk, and they like that. They like the story. They like the difference. They like the differentiation, and people who figure out how to get that product to those people, they can usually do pretty well. Whether that's a direct marketing situation or if you're fortunate enough to live in an area where you have a market for grass-fed milk, and there's a truck or a route that you can sell to. And quality matters. The color of the milk, the flavor of the milk. When we were doing direct marketing, selling milk right on the farm, we did both pasteurized and raw milk sales on the farm. Our customers were a certain section of our customers were extremely picky about the quality of the milk, but those were usually the same people that would pay just about anything to get their hands on what they thought was a high quality product. So if you were in the position to deliver that to them, to provide that to them, you had an opportunity to be rewarded for your efforts. And I that's speaking from experience, but I know that to be the case in other parts of the country as well. One of the things that has kind of blown my mind is the A2 milk. 10, 15 years ago, when we first started using A2 bulls to get A2 milk, it was kind of like one of those things where people just kind of poo-pooed it and said it was just a fad, that it would just go away, that it would never catch on, and it would never have any value, and that it was just a gimmick or a marketing ploy. But and these numbers I got from a few different sources: Allied Market Research, Verified Market Research Future, Globe Newswire, few different places. But the global A2 market was valued at $6 billion in 2019, and it's projected to reach over 20 million by 2027. So in the next 5-6 years, the A2 market is projected to, sorry, that's 20, that should be billion with a B on that second line there. Sorry about that. So more than tripling, and the global milk market is expected to grow 15 to 18%, up to 15 to 18% in the next 5 to 6 years. So there's growth. It's showing growth, and it's not just happening in the United States or in North America, but the highest growth is projected to be seen in North America. So I think that we're kind of just the last ones to get on board. It's already happening more in other countries and on other continents. So we've seen, especially in our direct marketing, and especially in the genetic side of things, a huge demand for A2 milk, for A2 cows, for A2 bulls, and for frozen semen from A2 bulls. So people are wanting to produce cows that produce A2 milk at I think higher levels than I've ever seen since I started paying attention to it. Polled genetics is another thing that's kind of really taken off. It's nothing new. Polled genetics have been around for a long time, but I think now people are really starting to see the convenience of it. Animal welfare is kind of becoming a more of a concern for many people. And there are even animal welfare certifications that you can get, and dehorning or disbudding is definitely a big part of that. Public perception. It is a nice story to tell people that you don't dehorn your cattle or disbud your calves. Even though when done well, we know that that the stress can be minimized. It's still a story that is nice to be able to tell. And then the marketing potential, again, for the folks on this that are watching this, that are thinking in terms of possibly raising replacement heifers or genetics for other farms. There's some benefits to having those polled genetics and being able to market them. And I just mentioned that there's some supporting roles that I think grain-free dairy has. There's you don't just have to milk cows to be involved. I think heifer growers are folks that might be in demand, because when you look at the return on your labor or on your investment for pasture that's on your farm that's close to your parlor, if you've made the investment if you're someone who's made the investment to convert your farm, you've got your paddock systems, you've got your parlor, do you really want to use your prime high quality pastures, or take the management time to raise your replacements on that land? Or would that land best be converted or best be used in producing your high value product and your most profitable enterprise, which might be your milk cows? So for someone getting into the business who doesn't have a milking parlor, who maybe has access to leased land, being a heifer grower where you contract or custom graze another farmer's heifers, or whether you buy calves and then sell them later, I see that as an opportunity for folks to get involved. And I know there's people out there doing it already, and they probably have some valuable things to teach folks that are wanting to get started. Value added processing. A lot of folks are looking at making other products with milk, cheese, butter, yogurt. That seems to be something that more people are looking towards doing, whether that's adding that value on the farm through on-farm processing, or working with other farmers to source milk and produce that possibly off-site. Marketing and distribution is something that kind of ties in with the value-added thing, because if you're producing a product, processing a product, you got to sell it, you got to get it to the customer. So folks that are interested in the marketing and distribution of these products can be a valuable asset in the industry, and they can fill a niche that will need to be filled as time goes on, as more of these processing facilities or businesses get started and get serious. And then quality control, again, kind of tied in with the other two above it. People that know how to produce high quality milk, people that know how to manage systems and manage facilities and manage production in order to produce the highest quality product. I think is something that's a lesson that we can take, I think, from the grass-fed beef industry, which has been, I would say, inconsistent in its quality. You hear a lot of folks say, well, grass-fed beef isn't really as good. Then you hear other folks say that grass-fed beef is the best product there is, and I think it's just mostly due to inconsistency and a need for more quality control and maybe more standardization. And so those are some things that could definitely benefit the dairy industry. But what I want to come back to is mindset and philosophy. And so success, in order to find it, you have to define it. What does success look like to you? What will you do or not do in order to achieve it? And so that's what I want to kind of leave you with thinking about is, how are you going to define success? And that's going to be what guides your thinking as you make the transition to grass-fed dairy, as you make the transition to grain-free dairy, as you make decisions going forward. How are you going to define your success? There's lots of different ways to define success. I've defined success in some of these terms before in one way or another, what I encourage folks to do is taking away from this is thinking about why you're doing this, thinking about what you hope to gain, what you hope your life will look like as a result of doing this, and let that be your guide. And so with that, I'll put up my contact. Folks might want that. And just also let folks know that Wolfe's Neck Farm is kind of going through a transition right now too. We are definitely a grazing dairy, but looking at getting at some point to 100% grain free. So folks are welcome to come visit us anytime. We're open to the public year round. And so if you're able to make it, we'd love to show you what we're doing here in Freeport, Maine. And you can get a hold of me or see what I'm doing on some of those addresses and links there. And I would also just like to open it up for questions now. So
Ben, it looks like there is one question already.
Okay.
Can you see the question and answer?
Let me minimize this.
Okay.
I think, do you want me to stop screen sharing? That might be the.
That's up to you. I can read.
Okay, now I can see the chat now. In the Q&A or the chat?
Q&A.
Q&A, okay. So here's the question. Thanks, Ben, for your presentation today. We've raised dairy goats and aspire to dairy sheep too. Are there any Maine, Quivira, or Wolfe's Neck folks in Maine or with Unity, Common Ground, etc., who might be approached regarding mentorship possibly? Yes. So what we do here at Wolfe's Neck is the DGA Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship Program. And so that program accepts interns and apprentices. The internship is a 3-year commitment. The apprenticeship is a 2-year commitment. So there's that route. One thing that's kind of in the works also right now is the Maine Grass Farmer Network. It will probably be resourced or rehoused at Wolfe's Neck, and so myself and some of the other folks here that are on staff will probably be taking that over and promoting that. And we really do want to bring in more dairy folks, because I think I haven't been here that long. I don't know a lot of people in Maine, but it seems like it's maybe has been in the past more of a grass-fed beef and lamb organization, and we'd like to bring more dairy folks on board. So yeah, just don't hesitate to reach out to me. Maybe I can figure out some folks who I could put you in touch with. And Rick Kursbergen from Maine Extension, University of Maine, also is a good resource. He knows a lot more people than I do right now, and he might be a good resource to reach out to find somebody in your area that you could visit or talk to about your operations. So those are some options. Looks like we've got, where is a good source for bulk apple cider vinegar? I had a hard time finding anything more than a 1 gallon jug last fall. So we got ours from, when we bought cider vinegar in bulk, we got ours from Steve Campbell. I believe it was Golden, I'm drawing a blank, I think it was Golden Valley Vinegar Company out of Fruitland, Idaho. But Steve Campbell was a fellow that we got that from. I know you can get cider vinegar and some other products like it from Will Winter, the Grass Farmer Supply. I think it's just grassfarmersupply.com. Carried some vinegar and other products. And so those were some places. And then I've seen some ads in, I don't know if it was Gray's Magazine or the Stockman Grass Farmer, maybe both, for the vinegar guys. There was an ad in there. I know there's been some ads in there for that. So if you get any of those publications, there were some sources in there, I think, for that too. So those are some sources that I've had it from. Do you find the energy or catalytic supplements provide an economic return? That's a good question. Oftentimes it's in terms of economic return on the money spent on vinegar or on a supplement. Sometimes that's hard to quantify. I think in terms of health and preventive maintenance, I think that's where I saw the most benefit. I didn't necessarily see like an increase in production or something that was easily measurable. Because when you have preventative maintenance, when you're preventing something, you don't really know what it would have cost you had you not prevented it. But in terms of the economic return, that's a tough one to answer, and I'd like to see more research done on it. Basically, there was a study done in the Midwest. I think it was in Iowa, and I'd have to go back and dig to find that. But they did some research with it on dairies in Iowa, and they did find that depending on the management system, they saw better results. And so, if you already have healthy, productive cows, you might not see as much of an improvement as you might if you have cows that might be struggling or need a little boost. So I would love to be able to answer that in real dollars and cents numbers. And so perhaps there will be some more research projects done on that. And I see Sarah Flack has been, I don't know if her answer, her comment is, we have a Northeast U.S. grass-fed dairy research project going right now. Dr. Heather Darby at UVM is the contact person. We're always looking for more grass-fed dairy farmers who would like to participate and resources to share with farmers interested in learning more. So I don't know if that's specifically addressing the apple cider vinegar question or just, dairy knowledge in general. Any other questions?
So if no one, oh, there's a question.
Sarah says we haven't researched ACV yet, so might be an opportunity for some folks to put together some proposals, or I know there's some research and development grants out there that might be be suited to that type of project to see what happens. But that knowledge would be good to have. So thanks, Sarah. Any other questions about anything? I didn't get into too much detail on the day-to-day and things like fencing and calf rearing and processing, and but I'd be happy to elaborate on anything anybody would want to know more about. Emily's asking, did I have some recommendations for sources for grass finished beef reading? Well, some of the books put out by Allen Nation about that also have a lot to do with marketing. Quality Pasture is one of them. I believe is what it's called. And if you look at some of the book lists in like Acres USA or Graze Magazine or the Stockman Grass Farmer, there's quite a few books about grass finishing beef. Another book that has helped me is Management Intensive Grazing by Jim Garish. Jim also has one about reducing or eliminating feeding hay, which I think is helpful as well in terms of maybe not feeding hay is not your goal, but the thought process that goes into planning to not feed hay is very helpful in planning forage chains, which is very important for dairy. And so, the Grass-Fed Exchange is a conference that has added some elements of grass-fed dairy to it. I know they had a conference out in Albany, New York, a few years ago that had quite a bit of dairy presence at it. And so any of the folks involved with the that source, that conference, you could probably look up and I think there's some recordings from past conferences, and I believe there was one that Phyllis Van Amberg from New York did at that presentation that talked about that was, even though it wasn't about grass-fed beef, it was very, very close to a lot of the grass-fed beef sources that I've seen. So I hope that answers your question. Here's another one from Robert. Ben, can you describe briefly the improvements of the genetic aspects of A2 dairy animals? Did the original genetic stock come from Europe or elsewhere? So as I understand it, the A2 protein, which it's a beta casein protein, was the original genetic stock. It goes back, it's the ancient type of beta casein that came from wherever cattle came from. And so the A1 protein, the A1 beta casein protein is a mutation of a specific proline in the beta casein gene. So in terms of the improvements of the genetic aspects of A2 dairy animals, basically there's been A2 animals and there's been non-A2 animals for about as long as we've been around. And the milk itself is only produced when the animal is homozygous for A2. So when it has both of its genes, one that it got from its sire, one that it got from its dam, are the A2 gene. That animal is A2, homozygous A2. It produces the A2 milk. And so in terms of the genetic aspects, all dairy animals all cattle carry one or both of the beta casein genes and it's more of a milk protein thing than a genetic quality. So you've got high quality genetics that carry it, low quality genetics that carry it. There's people that have more A2 cattle in their herd by accident, just because the bulls that they happen to use or the cows that they happen to have had the gene. And you can find out for sure by testing those genetics. We did ours with a hair sample that we sent to a lab. And so there's different ways to find it, but there's a lot of good bulls out there from all breeds that are A2, and they're not this semen straws or whatever are not any more expensive than the ones that aren't. So it's a very accessible quality to be able to add into your cow herd. Got a question from an anonymous person. How do you feed the apple cider vinegar? My few cows just eat second cut hay when they are in the barn being milked. You can't pour it over hay. We fed ours in a plastic tub. We just those rubber plastic tubs. We just poured it in there and let them free choice it. You can also pour it in a water tank, although it's corrosive, so I would not recommend putting it in a metal tank or a tank that has maybe a float valve that's got metal components. So we would add it to calf water or just have it in a jug. Some people use like a mineral lick feeder where they have those liquid feeders that some people had sitting in the trees that just fill it up, and then it's got a spinning dispenser that just kind of, as they lick it, it turns and adds more product to it. So pretty much any way you can get it to them, although it does rust the heck out of metal. So I would recommend plastic. I've seen people put those little rubber horse feeder type pans inside of an old tire, and that keeps them from tipping it over. So you can just get creative. I wouldn't go out and spend a bunch of money on something fancy. But yeah, if you pour it on hay, it just kind of runs through and goes into the ground. So that's probably not the best way, unless you're maybe if you mix it with molasses, it'll thicken it up enough to where it'll stick to the hay. I know that's what some people do. And there are some products out there that have it in it. I know there's a product from Free Choice Enterprises in Wisconsin called Corner Post it's basically another one of those catalytic products that has apple cider vinegar and sugar, and so that's one of those things that kind of can be a delivery method also. Any other questions? I should look at the chat.
No, I think we're done.
Okay.
Okay. And thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank everyone for coming. And just a note that we are presenting Wolfe's Neck Farm again next week. We'll be presenting soil health and pastures with Leah Prero, and same time, same bat place. So go to our Facebook page and sign up, or you can go to our Granite State Grazers website, which is graznh.com. And everyone go out and enjoy this beautiful day. I just checked. We might have a little snow tomorrow here in Concord, so get some sun while you can. Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.